My name is Claire Donovan. I've spent my life learning how to stay small even when I was born to stand tall. For years, I've hidden a truth that could change everything: my wealth, my business, my independence. All because I wanted to protect the man I love from feeling inadequate. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. I still remember the first time I stepped into my husband's family home. The walls were lined with pictures of his achievements, medals, diplomas, trophies, as though the house itself existed only to remind everyone of his worth. I admired that about him, how much pride he carried from his upbringing. But from the very beginning, I could feel it in their eyes. I was never enough. They saw me as an outsider, a woman with no real name, no legacy worth boasting about. They whispered about my ordinary background. They saw my modest clothes, the car I drove, the quiet way I carried myself, and assumed I had nothing to offer. And I let them believe it. Because the truth was dangerous not to me but to my marriage. My husband Daniel is a good man, but I've always known how fragile his pride can be. He grew up under the weight of his mother's expectations and the constant comparisons to his siblings. If he discovered that I was wealthier than his entire family combined, I knew what it would do to him. He would feel small in ways that no love could heal. So I made a choice. I buried my truth. I drove an old car instead of the sleek black sedan waiting in a private garage. I wore department store dresses while custom-made gowns hung in garment bags. I let them think I was just a freelance designer with barely enough clients to make ends meet. What they never saw was the empire. I quietly built a luxury interior design firm that catered to the wealthiest families in the city, a company that had expanded across 3 states, and an inheritance that could have bought and sold their family home a dozen times over. But secrets have a weight, and no matter how gracefully you carry them, eventually they begin to bend your back. Every Sunday dinner, I sat at that long oak table listening to the not-so-subtle jabs. "Daniel, you've always deserved better," his mother would say, sliding the roasted chicken onto his plate as though her words were just another side dish. "Your brother married well. A doctor's daughter. Look at the stability they have. But you chose with your heart." They never said it outright, but the message was clear. I was a burden, an embarrassment. And Daniel, sitting at the head of the table, would just smile politely and continue eating. He never defended me, not once. At first, I told myself it was because he didn't want to cause conflict, but over time, I began to wonder if his silence was its own kind of agreement. I endured it week after week, believing that love required sacrifice, that by protecting his pride, I was protecting our marriage. I kept my head down, swallowed my pride, and let them treat me like someone beneath them. But the thing about hiding wealth, about hiding who you truly are, is that people mistake your silence for weakness. They believe they can stomp on you without consequence. And his family, they became masters at it. What they didn't know was that every insult they threw, every time they smirked at my expense, was writing a story inside me. A story that would one day explode in ways they could never predict. Because secrets may bend your back for a while, but once you decide to set them down, they can crush the people who underestimated you. And as I sat at that table one Sunday evening, listening to the laughter of people who believed I was nothing, I realized something. The day I revealed the truth would not just be about reclaiming my dignity. It would be about rewriting the balance of power in this family forever. The Donovan family dinners were like theater performances, and I had always been cast in the same role: the outsider, the supporting character, whose presence only made the others look more important. The table was long and polished, heavy with the weight of tradition. Crystal glasses sparkled in the light of the chandelier, but the shine in the room never reached me. I sat quietly, keeping my hands folded in my lap, a smile fixed on my face like armor. This particular evening, the air was thick with roast beef and resentment. Daniel's mother, Eleanor, presided over the head of the table like a queen. Every gesture she made was deliberate, every word sharpened with an edge meant to remind me I didn't belong. "Claire," she said sweetly, passing the potatoes down the table. "I heard you've been busy lately. What was it again that you do? Decorating little apartments?" I forced my lips into a polite curve. "I'm a freelance designer," I said. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Her daughter Margaret smirked as she reached for the gravy. "How quaint. Mother, can you imagine Claire playing around with curtains while Daniel works so hard at the firm?" The others chuckled a ripple of amusement at my expense. Daniel shifted in his chair, his fork clinking softly against the plate. He didn't speak. He never did. I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed the sting. My mind wandered briefly to my office downtown, where my employees were likely wrapping up a client presentation for a mansion in Beverly Hills. If only they knew the curtains I was working on were worth more than their entire annual salary. Eleanor continued slicing her meat delicately. "I still can't understand what drew you to her. Your brother married Emily, a doctor's daughter. Connections, stability, respect. But you—" Her eyes flickered toward me, thinly veiled disdain in their glint. "You followed your heart. Admirable, I suppose, if not practical." The words landed like glass shattering across the table. Every member of the family paused to sip chew or glance sideways at me, waiting for my reaction. I smiled again, that same weapon I always used. "I suppose practicality has many forms, doesn't it?" I replied softly, letting the meaning float just out of their reach. Margaret rolled her eyes. "Well, whatever it is you do, I'm sure Daniel doesn't mind carrying the load. He's always been strong like that." Laughter followed sharp, cutting a chorus of approval for Margaret's cruelty. I felt my husband's leg brush mine under the table, perhaps an attempt at reassurance. But what was a touch worth when his voice remained silent, when his pride was more important than my dignity? The meal continued, every course served with another side of insult. I watched the family congratulate themselves on their wit, mistaking malice for humor. I kept my composure even as anger simmered beneath my skin, like a pot about to boil over. At one point, Daniel's father leaned back, his wine swirling lazily in the glass. "At least Claire doesn't seem demanding." "That's good, son. Simpler women make for easier marriages." The table erupted in more laughter. I lowered my gaze to my plate, carving at the roast beef, as though it had personally wronged me. My heart pounded, but my face betrayed nothing. What would happen if I let go of my restraint, if I revealed the truth right here, right now? Their laughter would turn to silence. Their smugness would wither into envy. But not yet. I reminded myself of the decision I had made long ago. Daniel's pride mattered more than this momentary humiliation. I had chosen silence for him. And if I was going to reveal the truth one day, it wouldn't be at a dinner table littered with crumbs of petty insults. It would be at a time and place where none of them could ignore me. Still, that night carved another scar inside me. When the plates were cleared and the family drifted into the living room, I slipped into the kitchen for air. The chandelier's glow couldn't reach here, and the hum of the dishwasher was my only companion. I pressed my palms to the cool counter, breathing deeply. "Are you all right?" I turned. It was Daniel, his eyes filled with concern but not conviction. "I'm fine," I lied. "You know they don't mean it." I almost laughed. "They mean every word, Daniel. Don't fool yourself." He shifted uncomfortably, his voice lowering. "It's just how they are. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally." How many times had he said that? How many times had he excused their cruelty as if it were nothing more than family banter? I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded, forcing another smile. Of course. But inside, I knew the truth. Every dinner like this one was a rehearsal. A rehearsal for the day when their laughter would choke in their throats, when the truth I carried so carefully would shatter the image they had built of me. I walked out of the kitchen, back into the glow of the living room where the Donovans sat like royalty, and as I took my seat among them, I thought, let them laugh. Let them mock. One day I will choose the stage and the show will end very differently. Silence can be louder than cruelty. At least cruelty has an edge, a blade you can see coming. Silence, though. Silence is invisible, insidious. It creeps in and makes you question whether the person you love is standing beside you or hiding behind the crowd. After that dinner, the ride home was suffocating. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only sound between us. I stared out the window, the city lights streaking past in golden blurs, my reflection ghosted against the glass. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel, his jaw set tight, but he said nothing. I wanted him to speak, to tell me he saw me, to admit the weight of his family's insults. I wanted him to tell me that I mattered more than their opinions. Instead, all I got was the hollow sound of his breathing and the click of the turn signal as we pulled into our driveway. When we stepped inside, I hung my coat on the rack and finally turned to him. "Do you ever hear them?" I asked softly. He glanced at me, puzzled. "Hear who?" "Your family. The way they talk about me. The way they look at me. Do you hear it?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. "Claire, it's just how they are. They don't mean any harm." I felt my throat tighten. "They mean every word, Daniel. And you know it." His eyes flicked toward me, then sharp but uncertain. "Why are you making this a big deal? I don't want to fight with them. I don't want to fight with you." The anger rose before I could stop it. "So instead you say nothing. You sit there letting them tear me apart with their smiles and their jokes. Do you know what that feels like? To sit there alone while the man who promised to protect me says nothing." The words hung in the air like smoke. He shifted uncomfortably, his face tightening with guilt. But still he didn't answer. I turned away, my heart pounding. In that silence, I realized something far more painful than Eleanor's insults or Margaret's smirks. Daniel's quietness wasn't just fear of conflict, it was self-preservation. He wanted to keep the peace, to maintain the fragile illusion of harmony in his family. And to do that, he was willing to let me bleed in silence. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling while Daniel's breathing settled into steady rhythm beside me. My body was still, but my mind was racing. How many years had I swallowed their contempt? How many times had I told myself that love was about sacrifice? But what happens when the sacrifice becomes a wound you can no longer hide? I thought of the truth. I had buried the office tower with my company's name etched on its plaque. The employees who depended on me for their livelihoods, the wealth tucked away in accounts that could secure generations. If Daniel knew, if his family knew, their entire narrative about me would collapse in an instant. But at what cost? Daniel's pride was fragile. I had seen it crack when his older brother flaunted his promotion, when his younger sister bragged about her husband's medical career. If he discovered that I had more power, more wealth, more independence than any of them, would he still love me? Or would my truth feel like betrayal? That night, I kept my silence as tightly as he had kept his. But inside, something began to shift. The next morning, Eleanor called Daniel. I overheard her voice through the thin walls of his office. "Claire doesn't fit in, darling. She drags you down. People are starting to notice. Don't you ever wonder if you could have done better?" Her words sliced through the air, each one deliberate, poisonous. I held my breath, waiting for Daniel's response. "Mom, stop," he said. But his tone lacked fire, conviction. It sounded more like a plea than a defense. I closed my eyes. There it was again, his silence dressed up as softness. Later that day, I tried to brush it aside, diving into my work. I reviewed blueprints, sent approvals to my project managers, and video called a client whose new home was worth more than Eleanor's entire net worth. For those hours, I wasn't Daniel's quiet, humiliated wife. I was Claire Donovan, CEO, visionary architect of elegance. But the contrast was jarring. I could command boardrooms, negotiate million-dollar contracts, and be revered by strangers. Yet at Daniel's side, in front of his family, I became invisible. That night, as I tucked away the files and prepared dinner, Daniel finally spoke. "I know last night wasn't easy. I'm sorry." I paused, the knife in my hand hovering over the cutting board. Sorry for what? For their words? Or for your silence? He froze. His lips parted as though he wanted to respond, but nothing came out. And in that silence, I felt the truth crystallize. My marriage was built on love, yes, but also on a foundation of shadows, my hidden wealth, his unspoken weakness. I set the knife down and met his eyes. One day, Daniel, your silence will cost us more than my pride. It will cost us everything. He looked at me, then a flicker of fear in his eyes, but he didn't ask what I meant. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he already did. As I turned away, the thought pressed heavier on my chest. Secrets can keep a marriage together, but they can also be the very thing that tears it apart. Most people think hiding a secret means burying it deep, locking it away where no one can find it. But mine wasn't hidden in shadows, it thrived in plain sight, just carefully separated from the world my husband and his family knew. When I walked into my office downtown, I wasn't Daniel's underestimated wife. I was Claire Donovan, CEO and founder of Donovan Interiors, one of the most exclusive luxury interior design firms on the West Coast. The building was modest on the outside, glass and steel like any other corporate tower. But inside, the Donovan name gleamed on the brass plaque at the entrance, polished every morning by the receptionist before the clients arrived. A quiet power radiated from that name, though most never connected it to me. After all, the Donovans who scorned me every Sunday believed I was nothing more than a struggling freelancer. When I walked past the glass doors into the office lobby, employees would straighten, offering polite greetings. Good morning, Mrs. Donovan. The Perez file is ready for review. The Van Dorns confirmed they'll sign this week. I would smile, nod, and stride down the marble corridor lined with photographs of our completed projects, estates sprawling across Malibu cliffs, penthouses overlooking Central Park retreats in Aspen that only billionaires could dream of. My firm had designed them all. Behind the double oak doors, my office was a sanctuary of quiet control. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilled sunlight across my desk, where contracts worth millions waited for my signature. Shelves displayed awards, but I'd placed them discreetly. I had never built this empire for recognition. I built it for independence, for security. I never wanted to depend on anyone's name or approval. Perhaps because I'd seen what dependence had done to my own mother. She was strong, but she had tied her life to my father, a charming man who squandered every cent he earned. She lived in his shadow, her talents hid in her spirit, crushed beneath his reckless pride. I promised myself as a teenager, watching her cry into the kitchen sink, that I would never allow a man's pride to determine my worth. And so I worked. Nights spent studying design while others partied. Days chasing clients others said were impossible to win. I clawed my way into rooms where people looked at me as though I didn't belong, and then proved over and over that I did. By the time I met Daniel, I had already inherited my mother's small fortune after her passing and multiplied it with ruthless precision. Real estate investments, stocks, expansions. By 35, I was a millionaire several times over. But Daniel never knew. When we met, he was charming, earnest, but weighed down by years of living in his family's shadow. He wanted to build something of his own, to prove himself to his parents who seemed impossible to satisfy. I saw his quiet struggle, the way his shoulders stiffened when his brother bragged about a promotion, or his mother compared him unfavorably to others. I loved him for his sincerity, for the way he looked at me like I was enough. And so I made a decision I had never made before I hid my power. I told him I was a freelance designer just getting by. I traded tailored gowns for dresses from department stores. I let him take me out to modest dinners instead of the fine restaurants where I was already a VIP. I wanted him to believe he was my anchor, that I leaned on him. Because isn't that what love is? Compromise, sacrifice. Or was it deceit? That question haunted me more with every passing year, especially as I sat through dinner after dinner with his family, shrinking myself smaller so they could feel taller. But inside, the truth never went away. It lived in the glow of my office computer screen late at night, in the steady ping of my phone with updates from clients, in the balance sheets I reviewed when Daniel was asleep. I kept it alive in secret, all while letting his family laugh at me. The irony burned. Eleanor and Margaret believed I was beneath them, that I was clinging to Daniel for stability. In reality, the purse I carried at their dinners could have paid off their mortgage. The house they looked down on me from, I could have bought it twice over without blinking. Sometimes I wondered if my silence was strength or cowardice. Because the truth was, I had not only built something for myself, I had sacrificed more than they would ever understand. There were times I turned down major opportunities, declined public interviews, all to keep my name off the radar. A feature in Architectural Digest could have launched my firm into international stardom, but I said no, because publicity meant exposure, and exposure meant Daniel might discover the truth too soon. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself protecting his pride was love. But deep inside, I knew the truth. I was carrying the weight of two worlds, and it was only a matter of time before one collided with the other. That afternoon, as I closed the lid of my laptop, my assistant poked her head in. Mrs. Donovan, the Chen family confirmed their payment. 25 million wired this morning. I nodded. Thank you, Evelyn. 25 million. While Eleanor sneered at me for decorating little apartments, I was closing deals that dwarfed her entire family's assets. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline. Somewhere, Daniel's family was likely sipping tea, talking about how I wasn't good enough for him. And for the 1,000th time, I whispered to myself, if only they knew. But the day was coming. I could feel it. Secrets don't stay buried forever. And when mine surfaced, the Donovans would never look at me the same again. Neither would Daniel. Secrets are fragile things. You can lock them away for years, keep them hidden with careful routines and practiced lies, but it only takes one slip, one stray detail to unravel everything. For me, that slip came on a Sunday afternoon in the same house where I had endured countless dinners filled with contempt. Eleanor had decided to host a small family gathering. Just close relatives, she had said, though her close relatives always included neighbors, acquaintances, and anyone she wanted to impress. I arrived with Daniel wearing a simple navy dress and carrying a bottle of wine I'd picked up at a local shop. Eleanor gave me her usual once-over, her lips pressing together as though she was calculating the exact degree of my inadequacy. Claire, she said, taking the bottle, such a practical choice. Not one of the finer ones, but I suppose it will do. Her words brushed past me like static. I'd long since stopped flinching. Daniel, as always, said nothing. The gathering was lively, filled with chatter and clinking glasses. I found a quiet corner, sipping water while Margaret held court in the living room, bragging about her husband's recent bonus. The Donovans thrived on comparison, measuring themselves not just against each other, but against anyone who dared to enter their circle. And then it happened. I was speaking with one of Eleanor's cousins when a familiar voice rang out across the room. Claire Donovan. My favorite designer. The room stilled, heads turning. A tall man with salt and pepper hair strode toward me, his smile wide, his hand extended. It was Mr. Harrington, one of my most high-profile clients, a real estate mogul whose latest penthouse renovation had made headlines in industry magazines. I froze, my glass trembling slightly in my hand. Eleanor's brows arched. Margaret leaned forward, curiosity sharp in her eyes. Mr. Harrington, I said carefully, forcing a smile. What a surprise. He shook my hand warmly. Surprise, Claire, you're the genius behind the most stunning apartment I've ever owned. My wife still can't stop showing it off. Everyone's been asking who designed it. I've been singing your praises all over town. A murmur rippled through the room. Eyes darted toward me, then toward Daniel, then back again. Eleanor's lips thinned. Apartment, she repeated, her tone as sharp as a blade. Yes, Harrington beamed, oblivious to the tension. A true masterpiece. Only someone with Claire's vision and experience could have pulled it off. Donovan Interiors is a name people should know, mark my words. The silence was suffocating. Margaret's smirk had vanished, replaced by suspicion. Daniel stiffened beside me, his eyes darting from me to his family. I laughed softly, trying to brush it off. Mr. Harrington is far too kind. It was just a small project. Small Harrington chuckled. Claire, you redesigned 30,000 square feet of prime Manhattan property. If that's small, I'd hate to see what you call big. The room erupted in polite laughter, but underneath it I felt the weight of every gaze pressing against me like chains. Eleanor's cousin excused herself. Margaret's eyes glittered with a predator's curiosity. Donovan Interiors, she asked sweetly. What exactly is that, Claire? I opened my mouth, searching for words, but Harrington beat me to it. Her company, of course. One of the best on the coast. Surely you know. I smiled tightly, my pulse hammering in my ears. It's just a little firm I've worked with. Freelance contracts, really. Margaret's smirk returned sharper than ever. Funny, you've always said you barely get by. Daniel cut in, his voice firm, but his eyes flickered toward me, filled with questions he didn't voice. Harrington, sensing none of the undercurrent, patted my arm. Don't be so modest, Claire. I look forward to working with you again. I'll let you mingle. And with that, he drifted away, leaving behind a trail of whispers and narrowed eyes. The rest of the evening was unbearable. Eleanor avoided looking at me directly, though I caught her gaze lingering, sharp and calculating. Margaret whispered to her husband, their eyes flicking toward me like daggers. Even Daniel kept his distance, lost in thought. When we finally left, the silence in the car was worse than the noise of the party. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. Claire, he said finally, his voice low. What was that about? I stared out the window, my reflection fractured in the glass. What do you mean? You've never mentioned a company, clients like that. His tone was careful, measured, but I could feel the tension beneath it. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It's nothing, Daniel. Just side work. You know I like to stay busy. He didn't respond, but his silence wasn't the usual indifference. This time, it was suspicion. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice in my head, dripping with triumph. She's been lying to you, Daniel. She's not who you think she is. That night, as I lay awake beside him, I realized the walls of my secret life were beginning to crack. It was only a matter of time before the flood poured through, and when it did, the Donovans would never see me the same again. Neither would Daniel. It didn't take long. Secrets have a way of traveling faster than truth, and in the Donovan family, gossip was currency. By the following weekend, the whispers from that fateful gathering had hardened into sharpened questions. We had barely stepped through the front door when Eleanor's voice cut through the air. Claire, she said, her eyes glinting like steel beneath her carefully coiffed hair, we need to talk. Her tone left no room for pleasantries. Margaret stood beside her, arms crossed, a cat-like grin stretching across her lips. Daniel stiffened at my side, his hand twitching as though he wanted to stop this, but of course, he said nothing. The rest of the family sat in the living room waiting. An audience. I placed my coat on the rack and forced my features into calm neutrality. Of course, Eleanor. About what? Margaret leaned forward, her voice syrupy sweet. Don't play coy, Claire. We heard about your company. The word dripped with sarcasm like a child mocking a fairy tale. I folded my hands in front of me. Yes, I do have a design firm. Eleanor's laughter was sharp and humorless. A design firm. For years, you've insisted you were just, what was it? A freelance decorator. I never insisted, I replied evenly. I simply didn't see the need to elaborate. Didn't see the need, Eleanor repeated, her voice rising. Or didn't want to admit you were exaggerating. Do you expect us to believe you've been hiding some empire while sitting at our table with that pathetic smile? Her words struck like darts, each syllable meant to pin me in place. Margaret jumped in, feigning innocence. Honestly, Mother, maybe she really believes it. You know how some women like to pretend? She tilted her head at me, her grin widening. Tell us, Claire, does your imaginary firm also design castles in the sky? Laughter rippled through the room. My chest tightened, but I kept my posture straight. My chin lifted. It's real, I said quietly but firmly, very real. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. His eyes darted from his mother to me, searching, but he didn't speak. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying me with narrowed eyes. Then, why the charade, Claire? Why the humble dresses, the modest car? The silence while my son carries the weight of providing? The question stung because beneath her malice there was truth. Why had I done it? Out of love, out of fear, out of pride, disguised as sacrifice. I swallowed. Because Daniel's dignity matters more to me than proving myself to you. The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Margaret laughed, shrill, mocking. Oh, how noble, you're hiding millions, but you want us to believe it's out of love. Do you think we're fools? Eleanor snapped. You've lied to my son, deceived this family. If you had wealth, why not share it? Why let Daniel work himself to exhaustion while you, sit in some secret office playing boss? Her words twisted the truth into something ugly, something selfish. I felt my pulse hammering my throat tight. They weren't just mocking me, they were turning my silence into a crime. Daniel, Eleanor said sharply, turning to her son. Are you really going to stand there and let this woman spin tales? Do you even know who your wife is? The question sliced through the air. Everyone's eyes turned to him. My heart clenched. And then his silence. He lowered his gaze, his lips pressed tight, and said nothing. That silence was worse than all their laughter combined. It told them I stood alone. Margaret's smile turned triumphant. See, even Daniel doesn't believe you. You've been pretending, Claire. Pretending to be something you're not. And frankly, it's pathetic. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth loud enough to silence them all. To tell them about the awards in my office, the contracts signed with billionaires, the millions wired into my accounts. To watch their smugness crumble. But I didn't. Instead, I inhaled deeply, forcing my shoulders to stay straight. Believe what you like, I said softly. Time will prove the truth. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Don't play games with us. You've been caught lying and now you want to pretend you're above it. But mark my words. Claire, people like you always reveal themselves eventually. And when you do, you'll drag Daniel down with you. Her words echoed in the room, final and cruel. I stood there, the weight of their scorn pressing down, Daniel's silence cutting deeper than any insult. But inside me something shifted. I realized that no matter how much I tried to protect him, no matter how much I diminished myself for his pride, the Donovans would never see me as worthy. My silence had not protected me. It had only armed them with more reasons to mock me. And as I looked at Eleanor's smirk, Margaret's satisfied grin, Daniel's averted eyes, I thought, this is the beginning of the end. One day they will choke on every word they've thrown at me. That day wasn't today, but it was coming. Humiliation has a strange taste. It burns in the moment, bitter and sharp, but if you swallow it long enough, it becomes fuel. That night, after Eleanor's tirade and Margaret's mocking laughter, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word. Daniel slept beside me, his breathing steady, but his silence from earlier still echoed louder than anything his family had said. I had endured their cruelty for years, believing I was protecting him. But now I realized something far darker. My silence hadn't just enabled them, it had trained them. Every time I smiled through an insult, every time I let Daniel's silence stand, I had taught them that I was powerless. And yet the truth was the exact opposite. I closed my eyes and thought of the office tower with Donovan interiors gleaming on its plaque. I thought of the files locked in my safe, contracts worth millions. I thought of the employees who called me their leader, the clients who trusted me with their dreams, the life I had built with relentless determination. No, I was not powerless. I had simply chosen to wear the mask of weakness. And maybe it was time to stop. The next morning, I woke before Daniel and slipped into my office at home. The room was small, tucked into the corner of our house, filled with swatches of fabric sample books and design sketches. To Daniel, it looked like the modest workspace of a freelance decorator. But hidden behind the cabinet was a locked drawer filled with things he had never seen: financial statements, award letters, confidential contracts. I pulled them out, spreading the documents across the desk. Numbers leapt off the page, 7 figures, 8 figures accounts scattered across trusts and investments. Evidence of the empire I had concealed. As I studied the papers, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had carried this truth like a burden, afraid it would wound Daniel if he knew. But what if it was my shield? What if instead of hiding, I used it to reclaim my dignity? I began to keep a journal not of my thoughts, but of their words. Every insult, every cutting remark, every moment of silence from Daniel I wrote down. Line after line, I documented the years of disdain I had endured. It wasn't just therapy, it was evidence. One day, I told myself this record would serve as the foundation of my vindication. And as I wrote, I noticed something I hadn't before: a pattern. Eleanor's cruelty always circled back to status. Margaret's attacks always hinged on comparison. They thrived on the belief that I was beneath them. What would they do when the foundation of that belief shattered? The thought carried a dangerous satisfaction. In the weeks that followed, I carried myself differently. At dinners, I no longer sat hunched waiting for their barbs to pass. I sat straight, my gaze steady, my silence less submissive and more deliberate. It rattled them. Margaret would toss an insult across the table, expecting me to flush or fumble, but instead I would simply look at her unblinking and smile faintly, as though she were a child throwing tantrums. Eleanor noticed. Her eyes narrowed each time I failed to react the way they expected. Daniel noticed too. "You're different lately," he said one night as we cleared the dishes. "Am I?" I replied softly. "Yes," he said, frowning slightly. "You're quieter, but not the same kind of quiet." I met his eyes. "Maybe I'm just tired of being invisible." He had no answer to that. At work, I poured myself into projects with renewed energy. Each time I signed a new contract, each time a client praised my vision, I tucked the memory away, like ammunition. Not because I needed validation, but because I knew that one day the Donovans would need to be reminded who I truly was. And yet I still hesitated. The truth was a loaded weapon, and once I revealed it, there would be no undoing it. I had to wait. To time it perfectly. To ensure that when the mask finally slipped, they would never recover. It was during one of those family dinners with Eleanor droning on about Margaret's new car that I realized my resolve had crystallized. Margaret leaned across the table, her voice sugar-coated but her words poisoned. "Claire, do you ever wish you'd gone for someone more established? Daniel's done well enough, but surely you sometimes regret not marrying into more security." The old me would have smiled, brushed it aside, swallowed the humiliation. This time I set my fork down and looked at her steadily. "I've never needed anyone to give me security," I said calmly. The table went quiet. Eleanor's knife paused mid-slice. Daniel glanced at me, startled. I didn't elaborate. I didn't raise my voice. I simply picked up my fork again and continued eating. The power in that silence was palpable. For the first time, it wasn't me who looked small. It was them. As the evening dragged on, Eleanor tried to recover the balance, throwing sharper barbs, but none of them landed. My calm unnerved her. Margaret fidgeted, her smirk faltering. They couldn't understand why the woman they thought they had broken no longer bent beneath their weight. And in that moment, I realized something vital: revenge doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it begins quietly, in the unshakable calm of a woman who has decided she will no longer bow. That night, as I lay in bed, Daniel turned to me. "What did you mean earlier?" I smiled faintly in the dark. "You'll find out when they do." His silence lingered, heavy and uncertain. But for the first time, I didn't dread it. Because this time, I wasn't shrinking to protect him. I was waiting. And when the waiting ended, the Donovans' world would never be the same. Rumors are poison. They don't kill outright. Not at first. They seep, slowly sinking into people's minds, twisting what they think they know. And when those rumors come from family, they spread like wildfire, because everyone believes blood must mean truth. It was Margaret who struck the first real blow. It began with whispers. A neighbor mentioned it casually as I left the market one morning. "Claire, dear, I hope everything's all right. Daniel must be under such strain with you depending on him so much. I blinked. Strain. She gave me a pitying look, her voice dropping. Oh, Margaret was saying you don't really contribute. That Daniel works so hard to keep everything afloat while well, you do what you can. Her words clung to me all the way home, sour and stinging. By the following week, the whispers had grown louder. Daniel's colleagues began looking at me differently when we attended company events. Friends who had once smiled warmly now offered hesitant, sympathetic glances as if I were some fragile ornament about to crack. And then came the dinner party, a larger gathering this time, with neighbors, extended family, and business associates. Eleanor loved to host these spectacles, all under the guise of family bonding, though everyone knew it was her way of flaunting her influence. I walked into the dining room, the chandelier blazing above the table set like a banquet. Margaret was already seated, her eyes glinting with triumph as she sipped her wine. Halfway through the evening, when the conversation turned to finances, as it always did with this family, Margaret struck. I honestly don't know how Daniel does it, she said with a laugh, loud enough for the entire table to hear. Carrying everything on his shoulders like that, providing for a wife who... She let the words hang, savoring the moment, then added sweetly, doesn't exactly contribute much. The room went silent, all eyes turning toward me. Eleanor feigned shock, her hand fluttering dramatically to her chest. Margaret, dear, don't be unkind. She glanced at me, her lips twitching. I'm sure Claire does her best. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp little daggers cloaked in amusement. I felt my cheeks flush, the burn creeping up my neck. Across the table, Daniel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His lips parted as though he might finally speak. My heart hammered, waiting. But then he lowered his gaze and continued eating. The humiliation crashed over me in waves. I wanted to stand, to slam my hands on the table, to shout the truth into their smug, laughing faces. To tell them that while they measured my worth in dinner parties and appearances, I was signing contracts worth more than their combined net worth. But instead, I sat there silent. Not from weakness this time, but from choice. Because their laughter no longer stung the way it once had. It was infuriating, yes, but beneath it I could feel something shifting. Margaret thought she had exposed me as a burden. She didn't realize she had handed me the perfect stage. When the dinner ended, I excused myself early. Daniel followed me out his steps, quick behind me as I reached the car. Claire, he said, his voice taut. What was that about? I turned to him, my keys trembling in my hand. What do you mean? Margaret, those rumors. People are saying you don't contribute, that I'm carrying you. His eyes searched mine, filled with something between confusion and suspicion. Why are they saying that? I inhaled slowly, forcing calm into my voice. Because they don't know the truth. His jaw tightened. Then tell me, what is the truth, Claire? Because right now it feels like I'm defending you against things I don't even understand. The weight of his words pressed into me. He didn't realize how close he was to the edge of everything I'd been hiding. I touched his arm lightly. One day, Daniel, I promise, one day you'll know. His eyes darkened, his silence louder than any accusation. That night, I sat alone in my office, the glow of my desk lamp casting shadows across the documents spread before me. The contracts, the bank statements, the proof of everything I had built. My fingers traced the embossed seal of an award hidden in a drawer, one that declared me one of the most influential designers in the region. The irony gnawed at me. Outside these walls, I was the woman being pitied, laughed at, whispered about. But inside, I was the architect of an empire. And maybe it was time to stop hiding. Not yet, but soon. For the first time in years, I no longer felt the weight of their laughter pressing me down. Instead, it felt like wind stoking a fire inside me. Margaret thought she had humiliated me. She had no idea she'd just set the stage for her own downfall. Confrontation never comes when you're ready. It arrives like a storm on a day that seemed calm, crashing into your life, whether you've built walls or not. For me, it came late one evening. Daniel had been quiet since Margaret's little performance at dinner, and I could feel the distance growing between us like a widening crack in glass. He sat across from me in the living room, the lamplight casting shadows across his face. His hands were clasped tightly, his eyes fixed on me with a heaviness I hadn't seen before. "Claire," he began, his voice low but firm, "I need you to be honest with me." I set my book down carefully, my heart already pounding. "I'm always honest with you." His eyes sharpened. "Are you?" "Because everyone's talking. Margaret, my mother, even colleagues at work. They all say you're not contributing, that I'm carrying us. And I've been defending you, but—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "But you've never told me the full truth about what you do." The words landed like stones in my chest. I had spent years building walls between my two worlds, wife and businesswoman's silence and truth, and now those walls were crumbling beneath the weight of his suspicion. I forced a calm I didn't feel. "Daniel, you know I work. I have clients, projects." "Freelance clients," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "Because that man at the party, Harrington, he didn't talk about you like some small-time freelancer. He talked about you like you were running something big. And you brushed it off like it was nothing." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. One wrong word and everything I'd hidden would unravel. But to keep hiding meant watching him slip further into doubt, maybe even resentment. "Daniel," I said softly, "I didn't brush it off because it wasn't true. I brushed it off because I didn't want your family to twist it." His brow furrowed. "So it is true." Silence hung heavy between us. My heart pounded against my ribs. This was the moment: reveal everything or keep holding the mask in place. Finally, I nodded. "Yes, I have a firm, Donovan Interiors. It's more than I've told you." His eyes widened, shock flashing across his face. "More than you've told me, Claire. How much more?" I hesitated, then offered him only the edge of the truth. "It's not just freelance. It's a real company. I have employees, big clients. Harrington was one of them." His jaw dropped. "Employees, clients like him. How long have you been hiding this from me?" My throat tightened. "Since before we met." The words fell like a hammer. Daniel stared at me, his face pale. "Before we met. So all this time, all these years, you've been lying to me." I shook my head quickly, panic rising. "Not lying, protecting. I didn't want you to feel—" To feel what his voice cracked, rising. "Inadequate, weak. Do you think so little of me, Claire? That I couldn't handle the truth?" Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held them back. "Daniel, it wasn't about you not being enough. It was about you being too important. I didn't want my success to make you feel small. I didn't want to put a shadow over what you've worked so hard for." He stood, running a hand through his hair, pacing the room like a man cornered. "Do you hear yourself? You've been living a double life. While I've sat through years of their insults thinking I had to protect you, you were—" He broke off, his fists clenching. "You could have stopped all of it with one word, one truth." I rose too, my voice trembling but steady. "And at what cost? Daniel, your pride, your place in their eyes. They already find ways to cut you down. What would it do to you if they knew your wife had more power than all of them combined?" He turned sharply, his eyes flashing. "So you decided for me. You decided what I could and couldn't handle. That's not love, Claire. That's control." The word stung like a slap. For a long moment, the only sound was our breathing, harsh and uneven. Finally, Daniel sank into the chair, his face buried in his hands. "I don't know what to think anymore," he muttered. I stood there, my chest aching, torn between reaching for him and protecting the secret I still hadn't fully revealed. Because the truth was, I had only given him a glimpse. He didn't know about the millions, the investments, the empire that stretched far beyond what even Harrington had hinted at. If he thought this revelation shook him, what would the full truth do? I sat beside him quietly, placing a hand on his arm. "Daniel, I've always loved you. That hasn't changed. Everything I've done, hiding this, keeping it separate, it was for us." He didn't look at me. Then why does it feel like it was never for me at all? The words sliced deep, leaving me breathless. That night, when we finally went to bed, he turned his back to me and I lay awake staring into the dark. For the first time, I wondered not just whether the Donovans would accept me when the truth came out, but whether Daniel would. Because secrets don't just divide families, they divide marriages. And ours was beginning to crack. When you hide a secret long enough, it becomes like a shadow, always there, always following you, but rarely noticed. Daniel had caught a glimpse of mine, and now he couldn't stop staring into the dark. 2 days after our confrontation, he came home earlier than usual. His tie was loosened, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes, those steady hazel eyes I once trusted without question, were restless, searching. "We need to talk," he said. I set down the folder I'd been reviewing, my pulse quickening. "About? You know what about," he replied sharply. Then after a pause, "Show me." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. Show you what I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. He stepped closer, his voice low but unwavering. "The truth, Claire. All of it. I can't live in half-shadows anymore." For a long moment I just stared at him, torn between fear and relief. The day I had dreaded, the day I had long promised myself would come, one day was here. Slowly I rose and walked to the corner cabinet of my home office. Daniel followed his footsteps, steady but tense. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the drawer I had kept sealed for years. I pulled out a stack of folders, laying them gently on the desk. Contracts, financial statements, design proposals, awards. The life I had built in silence. Daniel's brows furrowed as he flipped through them. His eyes widened at the numbers, the embossed seals, the names of clients he recognized instantly. Tycoons, celebrities, moguls. This can't be real," he muttered, his voice hollow. "It is," I said quietly. "All of it." He set the papers down, his hands trembling. "How much?" His voice broke. "Claire, how much are we talking about?" I hesitated. Then I gave him only part of the truth. Enough that we'll never need to worry about money. Ever. His eyes snapped to mine, searching, disbelieving. "Never worry about money. Claire, these numbers, they're—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "You're a millionaire." I exhaled slowly. "Yes." He sank into the chair, his face pale, his hands pressed to his temples. "All this time," he whispered. "All this time I thought I was the provider, that I was carrying us. That's what everyone said, that's what I believed. And you," his voice cracked with something raw, "you let me live a lie." I knelt in front of him, taking his hands in mine. "It wasn't a lie, Daniel. It was protection. I didn't want you to feel like less. I didn't want your family to use it against you. I wanted our love to be about us, not about money or status." He pulled his hands back, his expression twisted with hurt. "But you didn't give me the choice, Claire. You decided what I could handle. You decided what was best for me. Do you know how that feels?" My chest tightened. "Do you know how I felt? Sitting at that table every week, listening to your mother and sister laugh at me. Listening to them call me a burden, a nothing, while I stayed silent so they wouldn't hurt you. Do you know how much I gave up to protect your pride?" The words hung between us, sharp and heavy. Daniel leaned back, his gaze dropping to the floor. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, almost in a whisper, "Why now? Why show me now?" Because I said softly, if I didn't, we were going to break. And I'd rather risk the truth than lose you to a lie. He looked up at me, then, his eyes wet, his face caught between awe and anger. "I don't know how to feel," he admitted. "Part of me is proud, stunned. The other part feels cheated." "I understand," I said, my voice breaking. "And I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But Daniel, please know this. I never once regretted choosing you. Not your family, not your status, not your job. You. Only you." He stood abruptly, pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. "My mother can never know about this. If she does, He trailed off, shaking his head. She'll use it to tear us apart. I rose slowly, watching him. And what about you, Daniel? Can you know about it without letting it tear us apart? His silence was answer enough. That night, he didn't touch me when we climbed into bed. He lay on his side, his back to me, his breathing shallow. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had shown him a glimpse, not the full truth, but enough to shatter the illusion we had lived in for years. And though part of me felt lighter, another part ached with fear. Because I realized something terrifying: my secret hadn't just been protecting Daniel from his family, it had been protecting him from me, from the magnitude of who I really was. And now that the mask had slipped, there was no putting it back on. One day soon the Donovans would know too. And when that day came, the quiet game I had been playing all these years would explode into war. The Donovans always believed their strength came from unity. They moved like a pack, circling together, feeding off each other's judgments, drawing confidence from their shared disdain for anyone who didn't fit their mold. For years, I had been the easy target, the outsider wife, who smiled politely while they ridiculed me. But after Daniel's discovery, something shifted in the air. Perhaps he had confided more than he meant to. Perhaps Eleanor's sharp instincts sensed a crack in my mask. Whatever the reason, by the time the next family gathering arrived, the Donovans weren't just mocking me anymore. They were trying to erase me. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when Daniel and I walked into Eleanor's house. The familiar smell of roast chicken and lemon polish greeted me. The house always gleamed, every corner arranged as though guests were constantly expected. Eleanor thrived on appearances. She didn't clean for comfort, she cleaned for dominance. As we entered the dining room, I noticed something subtle yet deliberate: my chair had been moved. It was no longer beside Daniel, but shifted further down the table, squeezed between two distant cousins I barely knew. At the head, Eleanor smiled sweetly, her eyes daring me to challenge it. I didn't, not yet. The meal began with the usual chatter: Margaret recounting her husband's latest business trip, Eleanor lamenting the rising cost of groceries, as though she weren't sitting on her late husband's generous pension. I ate in silence, their words buzzing around me like flies. Halfway through the meal, the conversation shifted. Eleanor dabbed her lips with a napkin and glanced at Daniel. "We've been discussing the matter of the family property," she said. "It's time decisions were made about its future." The property. A piece of land that had belonged to Daniel's grandparents, now sitting idle but holding sentimental and financial value. I had heard whispers about it before, though the details were always conveniently vague when I was in the room. Daniel nodded slowly. "All right, we can talk about it." Eleanor's gaze flicked toward me, sharp and dismissive. "This is a family matter, dear. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable waiting in the living room." The words hit like a slap. For a moment, the table stilled, everyone waiting to see if I would comply. I set my fork down gently, my pulse steady. "I am family," I said softly. Margaret snorted. "By marriage. But this land has been in the Donovan family for generations. It's about legacy, bloodlines, things you wouldn't really understand." The condescension in her voice curled like smoke, suffocating. I wanted to laugh. If only she knew the estates I had purchased, the legacies I had already cemented in contracts and trusts. But I remained composed, my smile faint. Eleanor continued as though I hadn't spoken. "We think it should remain between Daniel and his siblings. That way, decisions can be made by those who truly grasp its history." My chest tightened, not from the exclusion itself, but from the brazenness of it. They weren't just mocking me anymore. They were attempting to erase my place at Daniel's side, to carve me out of anything that mattered. Daniel hesitated. His eyes darted to me briefly, then back to his mother. "Maybe Claire should stay. She's my wife. We make decisions together." The words were soft, uncertain, but they were the first crack of defense I'd heard from him in years. Still, it wasn't enough. Not nearly. Margaret leaned forward, her smirk widening. "Really, Daniel, do you need her to hold your hand for this? Some of us are capable of making serious decisions without outside influence." Their laughter rippled again, but beneath it, I felt something shift inside me. The quiet resolve I had been nurturing, the patience I had been feeding it, solidified into something sharper. I realized then that they weren't just insulting me. They were challenging my existence within their family, pushing me to the edges, hoping I would break. But I didn't break, I observed. When the conversation turned to potential buyers and future plans, I listened carefully, memorizing every word. They spoke in half-truths, glossing over details, hiding behind vague statements. It was clear they were maneuvering, and equally clear that they hadn't expected me to notice. By the end of the meal, when Eleanor stood to clear the dishes, I excused myself to the kitchen. Daniel followed me, his face pale, his voice low. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have said more." I turned to him, meeting his eyes steadily. "Yes, you should have." His shoulders sagged. "I don't know how to fight them, Claire. They've always been like this." I placed a hand gently on his arm. "Then maybe it's time you let me fight for myself." He looked at me, startled. For years I had played the silent, dutiful wife, enduring their cruelty. But now the edges of who I really was had begun to show, and he didn't know how to react. I didn't wait for him to answer. I returned to the dining room, rejoining the laughter and clinking glasses. I sat quietly, smiling faintly, letting them think they had succeeded in pushing me aside. Inside, though, I was planning. Because what they didn't realize was that while they plotted around one piece of family property, I was preparing to reveal an empire. While they tried to cut me out of their legacy, I was crafting a legacy they could never touch. That night back home, I pulled out my journal and added new entries. Eleanor moved my chair. They tried to exclude me from family property discussions. Daniel hesitated but remained weak. As I wrote, my hand steady, I realized the Donovans had drawn the lines for me. They wanted war. They just didn't know it yet. For years, I had allowed them to believe I was powerless. But power, I had learned long ago, doesn't always reveal itself immediately. Sometimes the most dangerous kind is the kind that waits. And I was done waiting. There comes a moment when silence ceases to be strength and becomes surrender. For years, I told myself I was protecting Daniel. But after that humiliating dinner, after Eleanor's deliberate exclusion, and Margaret's smirking triumph, I knew the time for surrender was over. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Eleanor announced yet another family gathering, a serious discussion about the future of the Donovan property. I understood immediately. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a meeting, and I was not meant to have a seat at the table. When Daniel told me, his voice was tentative. "Maybe you should sit this one out, Claire. It'll be easier." Easier for who? I asked, my eyes steady on him. He flinched but didn't answer. That was all I needed to hear. On the night of the gathering, I dressed carefully. Not in my usual modest navy dresses or simple cardigans. This time I chose a tailored cream suit, sleek lines, hugging my figure, understated but commanding. Pearls at my throat. The quiet elegance of a woman who knows her worth. When we arrived, the Donovans' eyes flicked over me, surprise flickering before they quickly masked it with disdain. Eleanor's lips curved into a smile too tight to be genuine. "Claire," she said, "I didn't expect you." "I'm full of surprises," I replied smoothly, taking my seat beside Daniel at the table. For the first half hour they ignored me, speaking over me as though I weren't there. They tossed numbers and plans back and forth, talking about selling the land, investing the money, securing their family legacy. Finally, Eleanor turned to Daniel. "Darling, it would be best if this decision remained between you and your siblings. Claire doesn't need to be burdened with matters she doesn't understand." Her words hung in the air, dripping with the familiar contempt. But this time, I didn't smile. I didn't lower my eyes. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. "On the contrary," I said softly, "I understand more than you realize." The room stilled. All eyes turned toward me. Margaret laughed, sharp and dismissive. "And what exactly do you understand, Claire? Curtains and throw pillows?" I met her gaze calmly. "Contracts, investments, asset management, real estate valuations. Would you like me to continue?" The smirk faltered on her lips. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Slowly, deliberately, I laid it on the table and slid it toward the center. These are the holdings of Donovan Interiors, my company. Daniel stiffened beside me, his face paling. He hadn't known I was going to do this. Margaret snorted. Your company. We've heard this fantasy before. She flipped open the folder and froze. Her eyes scanned the documents, her lips parting. Page after page, contracts signed by Harrington, the Van Dorns, the Chens, financial statements, awards, a portfolio of estates, penthouses, and luxury spaces I had designed worth millions. Eleanor snatched the folder from her eyes darting over the numbers. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she was speechless. Finally, she looked up, her voice sharp. This must be exaggerated. It isn't, I said, my tone quiet but unyielding. For more than a decade, I've run one of the most successful interior design firms on the coast. My clients are among the wealthiest families in the country. While you laughed at me, mocked me, dismissed me as a burden, I was building an empire. The room was silent. I turned to Margaret. You told people I was draining Daniel. The truth, I've paid for more of this marriage than you'll ever know. The house you sneer at, I bought it. The vacations, I paid for those too. Every time you laughed at my so-called little projects, I was closing deals worth more than your husband's entire salary. Her face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I turned to Eleanor, my voice softer, steadier. You excluded me from this table because you believed I was unworthy. But the truth is, the Donovan legacy you cling to so tightly is worth pennies compared to what I've built. If anyone here understands how to secure a future, it's me. Daniel's hand trembled beside mine. I glanced at him, but he didn't speak. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. Eleanor slammed the folder shut. And you hid this, from Daniel, from us. What kind of wife keeps secrets like this? I leaned back, my gaze steady. The kind of wife who sacrifices her pride to protect her husband's. The kind who endures years of insults in silence because she loves him too much to wound him. The kind who believes marriage is about more than money until she's pushed so far she has no choice but to defend herself. The words fell into the silence like stones in a pond rippling outward. Eleanor's lips trembled, her composure cracking. Margaret looked stunned, her face pale with shock and rage. The rest of the family shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between me and the documents like children caught in a lie. Finally, Daniel spoke. His voice was low, hoarse. Claire, why didn't you tell me? I looked at him, my eyes burning. Because I didn't want to lose you. Because I thought if you knew you'd feel small. Because I wanted you to believe I needed you. His face twisted with pain, and now I said softly, I need you to see me. For who I really am. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult I'd ever endured. Eleanor tried to recover, her voice brittle. Well, money doesn't buy respect in this family. I smiled faintly. Respect is earned, and I've earned mine. Whether you give it or not is irrelevant. With that, I gathered the folder, stood, and placed it back in my bag. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, but my face remained calm. I've been silent long enough, I said. From this day forward, I won't be invisible. Not to you. Not to anyone. Then I turned, walked out of the room, and left the Donovans sitting in stunned silence. Revelations don't end in silence. They echo. They stir. They provoke. For a few days after I unveiled the truth, the Donovans were quiet, too quiet. Eleanor didn't call Daniel as she normally did. Margaret didn't flood our phones with her endless updates about her husband's latest purchases. It was as if they had retreated into their den to lick their wounds. But with people like them, silence was never surrender. It was strategy. It began with whispers. An acquaintance of Eleanor's stopped me at the grocery store, her eyes wide with feigned sympathy. I heard things have been complicated at home, she said. So much money, such a burden on a marriage. Her words were carefully chosen, but the smirk in her eyes betrayed the source. Margaret. By the end of the week, the whispers had grown into full-fledged rumors. At Daniel's firm, colleagues congratulated him with backhanded compliments. Must be nice having a wife bankroll everything. Guess you don't need to work so hard anymore, Donovan. Each comment landed like a blow, not on me, but on him. I could see it in the way his shoulders tightened, the way his jaw clenched. His pride, the very thing I had tried to protect all these years, was now under siege, not from me, but from his own family. At the next family dinner, yes, Eleanor insisted on another, the gloves came off. Eleanor greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Claire," she said sweetly, "we've been talking about your success. Quite the fairy tale, isn't it? From humble beginnings to all this grandeur. Almost unbelievable, really." Margaret chimed in, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Yes, almost too unbelievable. People are starting to wonder where all that money really comes from. Interior design. Surely you're exaggerating." I met her gaze calmly. "Believe what you like. The truth doesn't change because you refuse to see it." Her smirk faltered, but Eleanor jumped in quickly. "It must be exhausting keeping up appearances. Running a company, hiding it from your husband, pretending to be something you're not. I'd worry about the stress if I were you." The words cut deeper than they appeared. They weren't trying to deny my success anymore. They were trying to taint it, to twist it into deceit, to paint me as a fraud. Daniel sat rigid beside me, his eyes fixed on his plate. I could feel the storm raging inside him. Every barb, every rumor, every suggestion that he was less of a man because of me, it was eating away at him. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Enough." The room stilled. Eleanor blinked, startled. "Daniel," she began, but he cut her off. "No, Mother. Enough. You've mocked her for years. You've treated her like nothing. And now when you finally see the truth, you still twist it. I won't sit here and listen to it anymore." My breath caught. For the first time in years, he was standing up, not just for me, but against them. Eleanor's face darkened. "She's changed you, Daniel. You're letting her poison this family." His jaw tightened. "No, you poisoned it long before Claire ever walked through that door." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret looked stricken, her usual smugness stripped away. Eleanor's lips trembled with rage. I reached under the table, gently placing my hand over Daniel's. He didn't pull away. After dinner, as we drove home in silence, I studied his profile in the dim glow of the dashboard. His face was set, but his hands on the wheel were trembling. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. He exhaled shakily. "I don't know. I feel like everything I thought I knew is unraveling. Them. You. Us." I swallowed. "Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you, but I won't apologize for who I am. Not anymore." He glanced at me, his eyes weary but searching. "Then just promise me one thing. Promise me you won't let them destroy us." I held his gaze. "Only if you promise the same." He didn't answer immediately, but after a moment he nodded. Of course the Donovans didn't stop. Their tactics shifted. Eleanor began hinting to acquaintances that I had trapped Daniel, that I had used my wealth to control him. Margaret dropped sly comments at gatherings suggesting I had been dishonest about my past, that perhaps my money wasn't as clean as I claimed. But the more they tried, the more desperate they looked. And the more desperate they looked, the more people began to see through them. One evening at a charity gala I had sponsored, Eleanor arrived uninvited. She stood in the corner glaring as I mingled with clients and business leaders who treated me with respect she could never command. At one point she approached, her smile brittle. "Quite the show, Claire. But remember, money doesn't buy class." I turned to her, my own smile serene. "No, Eleanor. Class isn't bought. It's revealed when people show who they are." Her face flushed crimson, and for once she had no retort. The backlash was real, and it was vicious. But as it mounted, something unexpected happened. I grew stronger. Every rumor hardened me. Every insult sharpened my resolve. For years, I had bent myself smaller to protect Daniel, to avoid confrontation, to keep the peace. But now, with the truth out in the open, I no longer had to shrink. I could finally stand tall. And standing tall, I realized was the one thing the Donovans could never forgive me for. For weeks after my unveiling, Daniel moved like a man caught between two worlds. At home, he was quiet, contemplative, watching me with an intensity that made my chest ache. In front of his family, though, he still faltered, trapped between loyalty to them and the growing realization of who I truly was. The Donovans, sensing his uncertainty, pressed harder. Eleanor called daily, her voice honeyed but laced with poison. "She's changed you, Daniel. You've lost yourself. Don't you see she's manipulating you?" Margaret sent articles about marriages destroyed by power imbalances, thinly veiled attacks disguised as concern. At dinners, they cast pitying glances his way, as though he were a victim instead of a man standing at the edge of his own awakening. And yet, slowly something in him began to shift. One evening, I found him in my office, the office I had once kept locked. He sat at my desk, flipping through one of the portfolios I had left out. His fingers traced the images of estates, penthouses, designs worth millions. His face was unreadable. I stood in the doorway, looking for something. He glanced up, startled, then shook his head. "Just trying to understand." I stepped closer, my voice soft. "Understand what?" His eyes lifted to mine, filled with a mixture of awe and sorrow. "You, us, how you carried all of this alone. Why you thought you had to." I sank into the chair opposite him. "Because I knew what it would do to you, to your pride, to your place in your family. You already carried their judgment. I didn't want to add mine." He exhaled, his hands pressing to his temples. "And in doing that, you carried everything yourself. The insults, the rumors, the sacrifices." He paused, his voice breaking. "You loved me enough to make yourself small." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Yes, but love isn't meant to be that way, Daniel. Love isn't about shrinking." The silence between us was thick, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Finally, he reached across the desk, taking my hand in his. His grip was trembling but firm. "I see it now. I see you now. And I'm ashamed it took me this long." The turning point came at another Donovan dinner. Eleanor had grown bolder, her bitterness now brazen. She launched into her usual monologue, her voice sharp with derision. "We've all seen what money does to people. It corrupts. It inflates egos. And now we must watch as it tears this family apart." Her eyes slid pointedly to me. Margaret added, "Honestly, Daniel, don't you feel emasculated?" Everyone's whispering. "They say you're living off her. Doesn't that bother you?" The table tittered with cruel amusement. For years, Daniel had let these words pass, his silence slicing me deeper than their barbs. But this time, he set his fork down with a deliberate calm that silenced the room. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "It does bother me." My chest tightened. My heart sank. Was he about to side with them after everything? But then he looked up, his eyes blazing. "It bothers me that my family can't see beyond their own pride. It bothers me that the woman I love, who has sacrificed more than any of you ever will, has been ridiculed at this table year after year. It bothers me that I stayed silent while you tore her down." The room froze. Daniel leaned forward, his voice rising. "But what bothers me most is that you think money is the problem. The problem is you. Your arrogance, your cruelty, your refusal to accept anyone who doesn't fit your mold. Claire is worth more in love, in strength, in integrity than all of you combined." Eleanor's face blanched. Margaret's mouth opened in shock. The others stared wide-eyed as Daniel's words cut through years of venom like a blade. I sat in stunned silence, my hand trembling against my lap. After years of enduring, of waiting, of praying he would see, he finally had. Eleanor recovered first, her voice sharp with fury. "How dare you speak to your mother that way?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "How dare you treat my wife the way you have? If you can't respect her, then you don't deserve us in your lives." The silence that followed was absolute. He reached for my hand, entwining his fingers with mine, and together we stood. Without another word, we walked out, leaving the Donovans staring in stunned silence. That night, as we drove home, I turned to him, my voice trembling. "You meant that?" He squeezed my hand, his eyes still blazing with conviction. "Every word. I should have defended you years ago. I should have stood between you and their cruelty. I failed you. But I won't fail again." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of release, of relief. "Daniel." He pulled the car over, suddenly turning to face me. His voice broke as he spoke. "I see it now, Claire. All those dinners, all those years you stayed quiet. You were fighting for me in your own way. And I let you fight alone. I don't deserve you." I shook my head fiercely. "Don't say that. You do. But if we're going to survive this, really survive, it has to be together. No more silence. No more secrets." He nodded, his hand tightening around mine. "Together." The next morning, Eleanor called. Her voice was icy. "Daniel, if you choose her over us, don't expect us to welcome you back." His reply was simple, steady. "Then I guess you won't see us again." For the first time in our marriage, he chose me. It wasn't a clean break. Rumors continued. Eleanor tried to rally other relatives against us. Margaret attempted to paint me as manipulative, Daniel as weak. But none of it mattered anymore, because the balance had shifted. The Donovans no longer held power over me. And at last, they no longer held power over Daniel. And for the first time in years, our marriage felt like a partnership, not a performance. When wars end, it isn't always with trumpets or banners. Sometimes they end in silence, not the suffocating silence of being ignored, but the peaceful kind, the kind that settles after a storm has finally burned itself out. For me, that silence came slowly. Not in one moment, not in a grand declaration, but in the weeks that followed Daniel's stand against his family. The phone stopped ringing as often. Eleanor, once relentless with her daily calls, fell quiet after Daniel told her we would not tolerate further disrespect. Margaret, usually loud with rumors and innuendos, retreated into bitter silence when she realized her words no longer carried the weight she wanted. The gatherings stopped. The invitations dried up. And for the first time in years, I felt free. One evening, I sat on the porch of our home watching the sunset stain the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was warm, fragrant with jasmine from the garden. Daniel came out and lowered himself into the chair beside me, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He handed me one. "You're quiet tonight," he said gently. I smiled faintly. "I'm just thinking." For the first time in a long time, it feels like the noise is gone. He nodded, taking a sip. "It's strange, isn't it? How much space silence leaves once you clear out the voices that were never meant to be there." I studied his profile in the fading light, the strong line of his jaw, the weariness in his eyes. For years, I had carried the burden of silence for him. But now, sitting here, I realized the weight was no longer mine alone. "Do you regret it?" I asked softly. He turned to me, brow furrowed. "Regret what?" "Choosing me over them." His answer was immediate. "Never." My throat tightened. "I regret not choosing you sooner," he admitted, his voice rough. "I regret every dinner where I stayed quiet, every insult I let them throw at you without a word. I regret making you feel invisible when all you did was love me." I blinked back, tears, my heart swelling with a mixture of sorrow and relief. "Daniel." He reached for my hand, his grip firm, steady. "But I don't regret where we are now. Because for the first time, I feel like I truly see you. All of you. And I love you more for it." The tears slipped free, then trailing warm down my cheeks. But this time, I didn't hide them. Life without the Donovans in our orbit was quieter but richer. I no longer dreaded Sundays. I no longer rehearsed smiles or swallowed insults like bitter medicine. Instead, Daniel and I began building new traditions, dinners with friends who respected us, quiet evenings at home, trips where laughter came easily. At work, I stopped hiding. I let my name be published in magazines, accepted awards on stage without worrying who might see. Daniel sat in the audience at one of those ceremonies. His applause, the loudest, his smile, the proudest. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes I still caught the shadow of hurt in his eyes when people joked about how lucky he was to have a wealthy wife. Pride is not a wound that heals overnight. But unlike before, he didn't retreat into silence. He spoke to me, shared his doubts, let me hold the pieces of him that once he would have hidden, and slowly we learned to carry each other. Months later, I ran into Eleanor at a charity event. She hadn't expected to see me. I could tell by the way her eyes flickered, the stiffness of her posture. "Claire," she said curtly. "Eleanor," I replied, my tone polite but cool. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years between us. Finally, she said, "You've made quite a name for yourself." I tilted my head. I always had one. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more. She turned and walked away, her back rigid, and for the first time I felt nothing but calm. Her power over me was gone. That night back home, I reflected on the journey. I thought of the years I had spent hiding, shrinking myself smaller to fit into a family that never wanted me to begin with. I thought of the countless dinners, the cutting remarks, the laughter at my expense. I thought of Daniel's silence, the wound it had carved in me, and the courage it had taken for him to finally break it. And I realized something. I had spent so much time trying to protect Daniel's pride, but in the end, it wasn't my silence that saved us. It was the truth. The truth set me free. The truth forced him to grow. The truth ended the Donovans' power over our lives. I had feared the truth would destroy us. Instead, it rebuilt us. As I closed my journal that night, I wrote one final entry. Never make yourself small for people who cannot see your worth. They will only grow bolder in their cruelty. Love fiercely, but never at the cost of your own dignity. Speak your truth, because silence only teaches others how to treat you. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, I wonder how many of you have been where I was diminished, underestimated, silenced by those who should have cherished you. If you have let me tell you, your worth does not shrink just because others refuse to see it. One day, the truth will speak louder than their laughter, and when it does, you'll realize you never needed their approval. You only needed your own. So if you've listened this far, I'll leave you with this. Never let anyone make you feel invisible. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be seen. And when the time comes to reveal who you really are, don't whisper. Speak so clearly that no one can ever again mistake your silence for weakness. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't in crushing your enemies. It's in standing tall, finally and unapologetically in your own truth. Have you ever hidden your strength to protect someone you love? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again here on Grace's Truth. Because sometimes the hardest truths bring the most powerful freedom.